Welcome to the Chosson and Kallah Shmooze you wish you had, but never got, number 25. As we have been discussing, we're going to go more and more in detail into sensitive matters of sexual intimacy, sexual dysfunction, and other matters that you need to know in order to fulfill your important mitzvah of giving pleasure during sexuality. As we've seen in earlier discussions, I can't go into all the details right now, but clearly this is a private and sensitive matter. Use due discretion as well. I ask that you look at the videos in order, starting with the one entitled Intro, and then they're all linked to each other. If you're looking at it on YouTube, you would be able to Google my YouTube channel, Simcha Feuerman, and then be able to look at the playlist called Chosson Shmooze you wish you had but never got, etc. PDFs of much of the materials also available. Today, we're going to talk about a rather common problem that many couples have to deal with, plus or minus, and that is sexual disparity, meaning that for whatever reason, one spouse wants sexuality, has libidinal urges much more than the other. And that is something that happens really in both genders. It might seem typically you're exposed to the stereotypical cultural messages that men just want sex and women want emotional intimacy. To some extent, there is some truth to that, but it is by far universal, and there are plenty of instances where there are different situations that men have very similar feelings, and it's not at all automatically stereotypical. However, there are certain patterns, regardless of what gender you're dealing with, that are typical. And there are people, and yes, perhaps you might say more women than men, that have difficulty feeling sexual arousal or even feeling libidinal urges in a context of lack of intimacy. In order to have intimacy, there needs to be emotional safety, there needs to be physical safety, oftentimes, and a sense of connection. And there are many people who feel their sexual or libidinal urges despite not having an emotional connection to their spouse, and others who do not. And this happens to varying degrees, and inevitably it leads to a lot of frustration, because if this is not approached between both partners, and this is key, both partners need to consider the basic subjective reality of each person's position without having contempt or demonizing the other side. Because if you don't do that, it becomes an issue of high tension and an issue of much distress. And the more anxiety and the more pressure and the more tension there is between two parties, the less likely that they will have an erotic emotional experience, which is vital. But that's not going to happen if each one is involved in blame game. Here is the reality. There's a lot of truth to the pattern that some people want emotional connection and intimacy before they can feel sexually aroused or even feel any desire, and others that don't. And when that happens, it can be challenging and frustrating. And oftentimes, the person who wants to be sexual and feels a strong sexual urge will accuse the other one of being pathologically cold, frigid, unable to appreciate sexuality, uptight, all those things. And oftentimes, the other one will accuse the person who's sexual of being overly aggressive sexually, superficial, not interested in real love, just wanting physical sex, and it can become quite tense. typically speaking, when two couples engage in that kind of lack of respect and lack of appreciation for the other person's subjective experience, it doesn't mean that you have to think the person's right, with quotation marks around it. It means that you have to be able to see and understand. We all need to be able to see and understand things from other people's perspectives without necessarily agreeing with them. It's very important that we're able to appreciate the fact that people have very different stories, very different perceptions of the world and of themselves. So to start blaming each side is not productive, and it reduces insight and increases a lot of attention. As I said again, the fact of the matter is people do experience sexuality very differently, and it could be acutely painful for somebody who experiences sexual arousal and libidinal urges even when they're not close. It could be extremely painful to be in a marriage where, for whatever reason, there isn't closeness, because here the person is married, trying to do the right thing and be respectful, and at the same time is constantly frustrated sexually, which is difficult. And on the other hand, it's the same thing for the person that doesn't feel much arousal at all or much libidinal urges, feeling all this pressure constantly, knowing that he or she is letting down their spouse, and maybe also starting to wonder if there's something wrong with them, that they don't have a desire. Or sometimes people become defensive and resort to preaching. It's not a good idea to use religion in relationships, even if you're right. So to say it's not kosher, it's not proper, it's not tznius. Feelings don't have any religious affiliation. Feelings are the same, even possibly in animals as in humans. Feelings are just feelings. So one person feels desire, they feel desire because they feel desire. Now, how they're supposed to manage that feeling is a very different story, but the feeling itself, there's nothing wrong with it. And yet, there is tremendous polarity that could begin to happen between a couple, and the tension gets worse. Just imagine this scenario. Forget about something as intimate as the bedroom. Just imagine two business partners that go into business together, and one person has a tendency toward financial conservatism and is very, very careful and doesn't take many risks at all. And the other person is much more of a risk taker and entrepreneurial. If they don't learn how to respect each other and work together, not only will the partnership be under great tension, but what's going to happen is their positions will become even more polarized, and the tension will become greater, and they will accuse the other one of pathology. So think about it. Let's say the risk taker makes a decision in business that's very risky, maybe the right thing to do, because oftentimes good business people do take risks, but the conservative person doesn't appreciate it. He will berate his partner and say that you're irresponsible, etc., etc. Oftentimes that leads to a solidification and even a further extreming of each person's position. Excuse the word extreming. I know it's not a real word, but it will cause each one to go to the extreme, because as the person who's a risk taker feels more and more cramped and feels more and more like they're being controlled, they will go to their safe space. They will go to their coping style. Their coping style involves taking risks to feel better about themselves and the rewards that they get when they're successful. So they're going to take even more risks. Now the other person, the one who's more fiscally conservative, that person is also now going to feel triggered by all the risk taking and will probably go to his safe space and end up even clamping down further with controlling and berating behavior toward the person who's taking risks, and try to conserve and even take less risks than normal because the other partner already took more risks than he or she can tolerate. You can see how people's behavior can become quite polarized and even made worse when there is no sense of respect and cooperation, and an idea that this is a project we need to do together, and to succeed we need to respect and somehow or another appreciate both of our rhythms. And that is the complex dance that often happens between the sexes, where in order to have a successful exchange, there may need to be a great deal of listening and a great deal of empathizing without blame, and trying to troubleshoot and figure out, how do we create an environment where everybody's safety needs are met and everybody's emotional intimacy needs are met, in order to allow for a wonderful connection. This can be extremely challenging. What I think also is fascinating is, even in the stereotypical situation where, as we often see, that a man will be much more interested in sex and be able to be sexual without emotional connection, and a woman might be able to be sexual without only through emotional connection. There is one situation that happens that proves that a lot of this is about setting and dynamics, and not about actual physiological issues. When a couple is struggling with fertility, as some of you may know, there are often very small windows of opportunity to conceive. The female part of the sexual process, ovulation, where the egg basically is available, is only for about 8 hours. That's about how long an egg lives. Now, the sperm can live for 3 or 4 days, but the egg only can live for about 8 hours. So on one side of the window, there is really only 8 hours to conceive, oftentimes. So if a woman knows she's ovulating, she will want to be sexual right then. Maybe even the man has to run home from work, or it has to be in the middle of the night, or whatever it is. If ovulation is coming, there'll be a lot of pressure. And here's where it gets extremely interesting, funny, and illuminating. Many times the women become quite libidinal and extremely interested in sex, and not just for the purpose of procreation. They become physically aroused, and oftentimes the men will say the very same tropes that women often say. I just feel you want it for my body. All you want to do is use me. It's hard for me to get aroused. And sometimes men even become sexually impotent. They're not even able to get an erection, and they're feeling all this pressure, and they're feeling used. And it's remarkable, because here you have a complete reversal of roles, which tells you that it's much less about male anatomy and female anatomy, and it's much less about male hormones and female hormones, and much more about context. So when one person feels pressured by the other to be sexual for some ulterior motive, in typical cases it's more about sexual gratification, the other one feels less and less respected and more used. And it just so happens, for whatever reason, the dynamic is different in many situations, where the male is chasing and the female is not. But honestly, this happens more than you'd think, that the roles are reversed. So what do you do about these things? They are very hard, because it's hard not to want sex if you want sex. And the minute you want sex, and the minute that you feel like you want to be sexual, there's going to be a sense from the partner about this pressure. There's going to be a sense that you need it, and that sense that you need it might make the person feel used. So for the men, it's kind of like trying to ignore and not think about a pink elephant. And the more you try not to think about a pink elephant, the more the pink elephant is there. How can a man realistically not experience desire and libidinal urges if he does? And if he does, then it makes his wife feel that she's only wanted for her body. There are no quick solutions. This is part of God's master plan, in the need for two people who are very different to learn how to encounter each other and learn how to appreciate each other. And this is a paradigm of perhaps even heaven and earth, the unio mystica, the idea that man needs to, or wants to, or desires to connect to God, and God desires to connect to man, and it's not possible really to ever do it fully because they're so different. Man and woman play this out all the time in their differentness. However, that differentness creates, if that differentness is appreciated and understood in a open-hearted, loving way by both parties, no blame, no shame, and there's tremendous acceptance for the fact that there is difference, connection can begin to happen, but it does take time. And this ability to appreciate differentness and this ability to be able to see things through the other person's eyes without becoming contemptuous or judgmental is not only a key for a great sex life, it's a key for a great marriage, and perhaps that is the exact training that's necessary in order to become a great parent. Because as most of you know, and some of you have yet to learn, children do indeed come in all shapes and sizes. And if you aren't going to have the ability, if we aren't going to have the ability to understand our children in very different ways and be able to see things through their eyes, we won't succeed. So perhaps the first training ground is our own relationship with our spouse. There are things that you can do that help. There is an old but true saying that foreplay is taking out the garbage, meaning that if one is going to wait until the night that they're going to be sexual or the hour that they're going to be sexual and think that being nice and being pleasant and getting along well is sufficient to build trust and intimacy, they might be very disappointed. The closeness and connection is important to be maintained throughout, and kindness and connection and working on your shalom bayis is something that begins from the moment that a woman becomes a nida, because that is the moment that you are being tested, that a man is being tested to find out, can he connect? Can this couple connect without the distraction of physicality? This is an extremely important thing, and it may take weeks, months, or even years to truly develop the ability to create a sense that there is connection and love regardless of any type of physical kind of connection. And it's important. And there's not much that one could do about it except keep talking and keep connecting. There's another important point, which, like I said, every person has a role. Each spouse must consider with great compassion, respect, and regard for the subjective truth of the other, and not to be contemptuous of male sexual need or female sexual need. And the spirit that should be developed between the two parties should be this idea that this is a team effort. Without intimacy, without emotional intimacy, we cannot truly have a satisfying sexual experience. But without satisfying sexual physicality, we can't have the best emotional connection. And that is true. Over time, couples that discover a way to make those two work together will have the most satisfying connection. I'm reminded of an insightful comment from Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, Zichrono Zecher Tzadik Levrocha, that the most harmful thing to spirituality is ignoring physicality. The most harmful thing. It is not okay to pretend that we're spiritual beings when we're not. It is also not okay to pretend that we're physical beings alone when we're not. And this is the whole paradigm. There must be tremendous respect between both parties. And so if one can develop this idea that it's a team effort, it's not about my need or your need, it's not about physical lust, and it's not about emotional connection alone, it's about the combination. And all the pieces must fit together for there to be a critical mass, an ability to achieve escape velocity. Then there's no winning and losing. It's a team effort. And it's okay for a man to say to his wife, if she truly can be reassured and understand that he is not pressuring anything to say, I'm having a lot of libidinal urges right now. I'm feeling very lusty. It's a very difficult time for me. No, I'm not playing a guilt game. I'm not expecting you to become an object for me to use to gratify my sexual desire. In fact, that's the last thing I want, because if we don't do it together, then we're not achieving anything in the long run. If you are sexual but you don't really feel into it, even if you do it just to, quote, make me happy, it's not really going to feel good in the long run, and it's going to make you enjoy sexuality less and less, because more and more it's not going to be about something that naturally grows within you. More and more it's going to be about something that's just a duty. And each time you're sexual that way, you betray yourself more and more. And each time you betray yourself more and more, you find less and less of a positive association with being sexual. So no, winning is losing and losing is winning. The point is, one could express reasonably and say that I am feeling a lot of lustfulness right now, and I don't want us to be sexual if we can't both feel comfortable and good with it. I don't want the favors. Now, of course, it can't be said in a nasty, don't do me any favors type way, but really to cultivate this spirit between the two of you. And it may take days, weeks, months, or years. I'm not kidding. However, it is extremely worth it, because the level of closeness and even the level of sexual pleasure that can be attained when two people really connect, mind, body, and soul, is something that in popular media is oftentimes never truly accurately portrayed, because the people writing the books or the movies and the people acting out these things themselves wouldn't have the slightest clue as to what kind of intimacy and love and passion that truly could develop between people married 10, 20, 30, 40 years who really feel safe and connected with each other. Believe you me, there's something about this that goes beyond anything that can easily be conveyed. But it takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of love, a lot of openness, a lot of vulnerability, and respect for each other's ways, respect for what is truly arousing. And it could be, like I said, that taking out the garbage 2 weeks before you ever land in the bedroom is foreplay. These are the realities of the fact that there are two people that come together. This is exactly, in my opinion, because no one could really know what the Torah wants, but in my opinion, this is exactly why the Torah considers masturbation to be so destructive, because one is gratifying sexual needs only for the sake of pleasure, and it's on a continuum. Masturbation on the one end, and this amazing joining of the souls, minds, and hearts on the other. But there's all levels in between, and even sexuality between two people can have a masturbational feel. Even a conversation between two people, if they're not really listening to each other, if they're not really trying to imagine what the other person feels, which includes possibly that the person feels lustful, or not imagine what the other person feels, that they're not feeling sexual and something has never really clicked for them. Let me be clear. Women, all women, have sexual desire. And if anybody, a man or a woman, is not feeling sexual desire, there is a challenge in the context of the relationship. Possibly, I would say, less likely is there a serious traumatic problem that's holding back the sexuality, because in the context of relationships, people are able to overcome many things. Not to say that there isn't trauma, not to say that there aren't hormonal, physiological differences, but most of the time, people that really, really connect can overcome much of that. However, sometimes it does require treatment and should have treatment. But all I'm saying is the importance is to truly get close to each other. There's another paradigm which is important to hear, and I'll conclude with that for today. The idea we have in the Torah that Hakol b'yedei Shemayim chutz mi'yireh Shemayim, nothing is really in our hands. Nothing is really in our hands except for the ability to get close to Hashem, or not to. We can't control how rich we are. We can't control how healthy we are. All those things we have no control over. The one thing we have control over is how close we are to Hashem or not. Again, it's not an accident. The very same paradigm exists in a relationship. There's much we can't control. We really can't control whether we feel aroused or not. We really can't control whether we feel depressed or not. We really can't control whether we love each other or not. There's so many things that we truly, truly cannot control. But there is one thing we could always, always decide. We can always decide whether we are getting closer to each other or not. We can always try to understand the other person. We can always try to understand and know deeply what the other person is going through, no matter what. So, if you're not feeling sexual, if you're not feeling aroused, you can't really control that. And you can't force yourself to feel that way, but you could truly, truly care and try to understand what the other person is feeling and how difficult it might be for them to feel lustful and not have any outlet for that lust. On the reverse side, you can't control whether your spouse is going to be sexual or not, or whether your spouse is going to feel aroused or not. You can't. That is something that is emotional and not completely under anybody's control. But without blaming, without shaming, without guilting, you could try as best as you can to understand what the world is like, what it's like being with you and trying to be sexual with you. You could really care. You know what's an amazing question? It's not my own idea. I got it from somebody else. But what's an amazing question to ask your spouse at a quiet time is, what is it really like being married to me? Just think about that. Not what do you think of me, not how's your day going, but what is it like being married to me? What's it like being sexual with me? I'd like to know that. That's what you can ask your spouse. Not should we be sexual or not, or what's wrong with you, or what's wrong with me, or what do you like, or what do you hate. How about just, could you help me understand what being sexual with me is like?